The moss is our first clue, our entry point into this narrative of deception. To the untrained eye, this velvety, bright green carpet is the very essence of a healthy, moist environment. It feels ancient, pristine, and pure. But let's interrogate that assumption with data. Mosses, particularly the types that form in these extensive mats in tropical rainforests, are non-vascular plants. They have no roots, no internal plumbing to move water and nutrients. They are passive absorbers, living directly off atmospheric moisture and mineral dust. Their proliferation is not a sign of a balanced, multi-layered forest canopy, but rather an indicator of specific and often changing microclimatic conditions. Research from the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in Panama has demonstrated a clear correlation between increased moss and bryophyte biomass in two key factors: sustained high humidity and, counterintuitively, increased light penetration. In a primary, undisturbed rainforest, the canopy is a dense, multi-storied vault. Light is a fiercely contested commodity, filtered through layer upon layer of leaves, creating a dim, stable underworld below. In such an environment, moss growth is limited to specific niches, the dim northern sides of trunks, the lower sections where humidity pools. However, when a large canopy tree falls, whether by natural death or human intervention like selective logging, it creates a light gap. Sunlight floods the forest floor. This sudden input of energy, combined with the constant high humidity, creates an explosive growth opportunity not for the slow-growing canopy tree saplings necessarily, but for the opportunistic mosses and ferns. They colonize the newly illuminated trunks and branches with astonishing speed. Satellite imagery analysis and ground surveys have shown that on the edges of forest fragments, where the microclimate is windier, drier in flashes, but also subject to sudden sunburst, the composition of epiphytes shifts. Slow-growing, specialized orchids and bromeliads that co-evolved with specific pollinators and microsites begin to decline, while the generalist, rapidly reproducing mosses gain territory. This moss, therefore, is a biological data log. Its bright green is a pigment called chlorophyll, optimized for capturing the specific light spectra that now, unnaturally, bathe these trunks. It is a sign of a forest interior becoming an edge of a closed system being pried open. Furthermore, the weight of these waterlogged moss mats becomes an engineering stressor. A study published in Global Change Biology estimated that saturated moss colonies can add hundreds of kilograms of weight to a tree's canopy branches. During storms, this added load increases the risk of branch snap and tree fall, creating yet more light gaps, and thus a positive feedback loop for further moss colonization. So, this green felt is not merely decoration. It is a symptom of trauma, a scab forming over a wound in the forest canopy. It tells a story of disruption, of a system that has lost its original architectural integrity and is now being recolonized by simpler, more rudimentary life forms. The moss is the first responder to disturbance, and its very success is a quiet testament to a loss. It thrives not because the forest is perfectly healthy, but because the precise, complex checks and balances of the primary rainforest have been altered. This leads us inevitably to the second character in this drama, the vines or lianas, which are not passive observers like the moss, but active, aggressive agents of change in this disrupted green theater. If the moss is the silent, smothering blanket, then the vines are the strategic, climbing army, and their proliferation is one of the most significant and alarming ecological shifts observed by scientists monitoring tropical forests worldwide. Lianas, woody vines that begin life on the forest floor, but spend their lives climbing trees to reach the canopy, are not inherently evil. They are native components of these ecosystems. However, their population dynamics are a critical bioindicator. In a balanced old-growth forest, lianas exist in moderation, their growth checked by a variety of factors. including the dense shade of the intact canopy, limiting their sealing success. And perhaps most importantly, by the activities of large herbivores like tapirs and lowland forest herbivores that browse on their succulent shoots. The current explosion of liana biomass, documented from the Amazon to West Africa to Southeast Asia, is a statistical reality. A meta-analysis of over 50 studies, highlighted in the journal Ecology, concluded that liana abundance and density have increased substantially over the past few decades in neotropical forests. Why? The data points to a perfect storm of anthropogenic factors. First, as we established with the moss, forest fragmentation and disturbance create more light gaps. Liana seeds, often dispersed by wind or birds into these open areas, germinate rapidly in the bright light. Their growth strategy is ruthless efficiency. They invest minimally in building thick, supportive trunks of their own. Instead, they channel their resources into long, fast-growing stems that use the structural investment of trees as a free elevator to the sunlight. They are the ultimate forest freeloaders in a race to the top. Second, the increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide, the very gas that trees are celebrated for absorbing, may be disproportionately favoring lianas. Physiological studies show that many liana species have a more efficient photosynthetic pathway and water use efficiency under elevated CO2 compared to trees. They can grow faster with the same resources, outcompeting tree saplings in the understory. Third, changes in precipitation patterns, longer dry seasons in some parts of the tropics, linked to climate change and deforestation. Altered weather patterns favor lianas. Their deep and extensive root systems often give them better access to soil water during droughts than trees, allowing them to maintain growth and even gain a competitive advantage when trees are stressed and shedding leaves. The consequence of this liana surge is not just aesthetic. It is a fundamental drag on the carbon sequestration capacity of the rainforest. A landmark study from the University of Leeds, tracking forest plots for 30 years, found that liana-infested trees grow significantly slower in diameter. By hoarding light, water, and nutrients, and by physically constricting the tree's trunk, a process known as girdling, which restricts nutrient flow, lianas suppress tree growth and increase tree mortality. When a liana-choked tree dies and falls, it often brings down with it a tangled web of vines that connect to and pull down neighboring trees, creating a cascading treefall gap of enormous size, which then becomes a nursery for more light-loving lianas and moss. This is a regime change. The forest is shifting from a system dominated by massive, carbon-rich trees to one dominated by faster cycling, carbon-poor, woody vines. The visual of a tree entangled in a beautiful, leafy vine is, in ecological terms, often a portrait of a tree in a losing battle for its life. The vine's green is the green of a competitor, not a companion. And this competition reshapes the entire animal community that depends on the complex architecture of a mature tree canopy, forcing us to look beyond the plants to the silent witnesses and agents of this change, the fauna that are either fleeing or adapting to this new tangled world. This transformation from a towering, arboreal cathedral to a tangled, vine-dominated thicket has profound and cascading consequences for the animal inhabitants, and their changing fortunes provide the most poignant data set of all. The rainforest fauna did not evolve in a static museum diorama. They evolved in precise relationship with a specific physical structure. The dense, layered canopy of an undisturbed forest offers a three-dimensional metropolis of niches. Insectivorous birds that specialize in gleaning insects from the underside of large, moss-free leaves, monkeys that travel along interconnected highways of sturdy branches, slow-moving, camouflaged, arboreal mammals like sloths and potatoes that rely on the concealment of a dense, dark canopy. The proliferation of vines and the moss-induced simplification of tree surfaces disrupts this architectural specialization. Research from fragmented forests in the Brazilian Amazon shows a decline in understory insectivorous birds and large-gaped frugivorous birds that rely on large, mature trees for fruit. These are replaced by edge-adapted generalists, often smaller birds and more mobile species. The vine tangles themselves create a new kind of habitat, a low, dense, impenetrable thicket that favors certain types of rodents, snakes and ground foraging birds, but acts as a formidable barrier for larger terrestrial mammals that require open understories to move, like peccaries or even jaguars. Their hunting success and ranging patterns are severely disrupted. Furthermore, the change in plant composition directly alters the food web. Many lianas produce abundant, small, sugary fruits year-round, a different nutritional profile from the often larger, lipid-rich fruits of canopy trees. This shifts the diet and potentially the health of frugivores. A study on primate communities in liana-rich versus liana-poor forest sections found that while some resilient species like capuchin monkeys adapt well, others that are more specialized suffer. Perhaps the most critical faunal link being broken is in the realm of the unseen engineers, the pollinators and seed dispersers. The intricate flowers of many canopy trees and epiphytic orchids have co-evolved with specific hummingbirds, bats, or insects. As those plants decline in a vine-choked, moss-smothered environment, their partners lose their food source, vanish. Conversely, without these specific animals, the seeds of the mature forest trees are not dispersed into new areas, crippling the forest's ability to regenerate itself. This creates an empty forest syndrome, a place that may look green from a distance but is functionally hollow, silent of the complex interactions that sustain its long-term health. The data from acoustic monitoring studies is startling. The soundscape of a primary forest, with its diverse layers of insect, bird, and mammal calls, is measurably richer and more complex than that of a disturbed, vine-dominated one, which often has gaps in specific frequency bands where specialist calls have disappeared. Animals are not just passive victims. Some become unwitting accelerants of the change. For instance, in areas where large seed-dispersing animals like tapirs or large primates have been hunted out, the seed rain is dominated by small liana seeds dispersed by bats or wind, further tilting the competitive landscape away from trees. This faunal feedback loop is a powerful driver, locking the forest into a new, simpler state. It's a biological transition from a complex, high-value economy to a monoculture of opportunistic species. Understanding this requires us to zoom out from the single image of a green mossy trunk and see the forest as a dynamic, interconnected system of energy flows, chemical exchanges, and historical legacies, which is precisely what we must do to grasp the full scale of what this green imagery represents. To truly diagnose the health of this bright green landscape, we must think like a systems analyst, not a photographer. The rainforest is not a collection of independent organisms, but a flowing, pulsing network of energy, water, and nutrients. The shift towards moss and vine dominance represents a fundamental rerouting of these life support systems with global implications. Let's follow the carbon. In a mature rainforest, a significant portion of the carbon is locked in the massive woody biomass of the tree's trunks that can stand for centuries. This is low carbon, securely stored. The carbon capture engine is the high, complex canopy with its vast total leaf area. When vines take over, they divert this flow. Lianas put less carbon into dense, long-lasting wood and more into fast-growing stems and leaves. When a tree dies, the liana wood, being less dense, decomposes faster, releasing its stored carbon back into the atmosphere more quickly. The net effect, confirmed by plot studies across the tropics, is that a liana-infested forest plot sequesters significantly less net carbon per year than a similar plot free of heavy liana loads. In a world counting on tropical forests as a critical carbon sink to buffer climate change, this is a devastating negative feedback loop. Human activities that disturb forests promote lianas, which reduce the forest's carbon uptake, which leaves more CO2 in the atmosphere to further drive climate change and disturbance. Now follow the water. Trees are mighty water pumps, drawing moisture from deep soils and releasing it as vapor through the leaves in a process called transpiration. This moisture contributes to regional rainfall patterns, the famous flying rivers of the Amazon. Lianas, with their high leaf area and efficient water use, also transpire, but their impact on the soil and local humidity is different. Their dense tangles near the ground can trap moisture, increasing local humidity at the understory level, benefiting mosses, but they may also intercept rainfall before it hits the forest floor, altering soil moisture profiles. This microclimatic change affects everything from seedling survival to fungal networks. The mycorrhizal fungi, the vast, symbiotic internet of the forest floor that connects trees and facilitates nutrient sharing, are highly sensitive to soil moisture and temperature. A cooler, wetter, more homogenized understory, shaded by vine leaves instead of tree canopy, can shift fungal community composition, potentially disrupting these ancient nutrient-sharing networks that help trees thrive. Finally, consider the nutrient cycle. In a healthy forest, nutrients are tightly cycled. When a large tree falls, it decomposes slowly, providing a long-term nutrient bank for the surrounding area. The decomposition of fast-growing liana wood and the simpler moss biomass follows a different chemical pathway potential, leading to faster leaching of nutrients from the system, especially on the fragile soils that underlie many rainforests. This system's view reveals the bright green moss and vines not as mere symptoms, but as active drivers pushing the ecosystem toward a different stable state, a technical term ecologists use for a landscape that has undergone a regime shift and may not easily return to its original form, even if the initial pressure is removed. It is a greener forest in one sense, but a poorer, simpler, and more fragile one. It is a system running on different software, and this new program has direct and often alarming consequences for the human communities that live in and depend on these forests, which is the final crucial layer we must unpack. This brings us to the human dimension, the ultimate reason why this shift from a complex forest to a tangled, mossy one matters far beyond academic interest. For indigenous and local communities who have subsisted in and managed these forests for millennia, these changes are not theoretical. They are a direct assault on their food security, culture, and traditional knowledge. The collapse of large tree species means a loss of hardwoods used for canoes, housing, and tools. The decline in populations of large frugivores, like monkeys and toucans, means a reduction in game meat. The shift in plant composition affects the availability of medicinal plants, many of which are specific to the understory of mature forests, not vine-choked thickets. Furthermore, a forest with a high density of liana is exponentially more difficult and dangerous to navigate on foot. For scientists and conservationists, it becomes a logistical nightmare for field work and monitoring. For sustainable forestry operations, lianas are a severe problem, as they increase tree mortality and damage during selective logging, reducing the economic viability and sustainability of the practice. On a global scale, the reduction in carbon sequestration capacity of these forests represents a direct threat to climate stability, affecting every single one of us. The bright green aesthetic, often used in marketing and media to symbolize a healthy planet, is therefore a dangerous illusion if it represents the simplified, degraded state. It allows for greenwashing on a planetary scale, where images of greenery are used to imply ecological integrity where little exists. This is why your understanding is critical. You, as a viewer, have the power to demand and discern nuance. When you see an image of a rainforest, ask the deeper questions. Is this a closed canopy primary forest, or a fragmented, vine-dominated edge? Does this green represent complexity or simplicity? Your informed perspective creates demand for accurate storytelling and holds entities accountable. So here is my final, crucial call to action. This is not where our engagement ends, it is where it begins. First, subscribe and hit the bell icon. Why? Because next week, I will be releasing a follow-up deep dive video where I show you, with satellite imagery and ground truthing, exactly how to spot a degraded versus an intact rainforest from space and from photos. It's a skill you can learn. Second, use your voice in the comments below. I want you to paste links to photos or videos of forests you've seen online or in media. And we will, as a community, start to analyze them together. Ask the hard questions. This looks green, but is it healthy? Let's start a movement of educated observation. Third, and most importantly, support organizations that go beyond just planting trees. Look for and champion groups that focus on forest integrity, those working on connecting fragmented landscapes, supporting indigenous land tenure, and protecting massive, untouched primary forests, the ones that don't look like this tangled, moss-covered scene, but instead appear darker, more layered, and less photogenically uniform from the inside. Their names are often local, not the biggest global brands. I will compile and pin a list of such evidence-based, on-the-ground organizations in the comments based on your region. Your informed awareness and targeted support are the real antidotes to the silent, green decline we've unpacked today. This video was never just about moss and vines. It was about perception, power, and the future of the most critical ecosystems on Earth. You are now armed with the data. Don't just be a passive consumer of beautiful imagery. Be an active interpreter and defender of true ecological truth. The forest's fate, in many ways, is now also in your hands. So let me know in the comments what's the first forest image you're going to re-examine with this new lens. I'll be there reading and responding. Thank you for watching, for thinking, and for committing to seeing beyond the green.